You ever see one of those massive suspension bridges that just looks perfectly solid from a distance?
Oh, yeah, like the Golden Gate or something.
Right, exactly. The cables are thick, the towers are made of this reinforced concrete, and it looks like it could withstand a hurricane without even flinching.
Hmm.
But then, an engineer points out that the entire structure is actually vibrating at a frequency you can't even see.
Hmm.
And there are like a few specific bolts deep inside the foundation that are under just an impossible amount of tension.
Basically a disaster waiting to happen.
Exactly. Well, today we are looking at the political equivalent of those bolts. Welcome to the deep dive. It's Tuesday, May 19th, 2026, and we're unpacking a really raw, incredibly detailed report from the Global Review.
Yeah, authored by Fareed Novin. It's a fascinating read.
It really is. And our mission today is to figure out how a domestic political grievance in one Canadian province somehow transformed into, well, a global stress test for Western democratic resilience.
It's honestly a remarkable convergence of events. I mean, we're looking at a scenario where a massive separatist petition, a historic Indigenous legal ruling, and a landmark G7 energy deal all just collided.
Over the span of just a few days, right?
Yeah, exactly. Just this month. It's like a perfect storm of constitutional law and global geopolitics.
Now, setting the stage for you, our listener, the sources we're dissecting today, they cover some intensely charged political maneuvers.
Very charged.
Right. I mean, we're going to be looking at the actions of Canadian liberals and conservatives, U.S. Republican figures, and even foreign intelligence networks. So I want to be super clear. We aren't here to pick a side in this political minefield.
Yeah, or endorse any specific viewpoints from the report.
Exactly. Our goal for this deep dive is strictly to decode the structural blueprints of the crisis. We want to help you understand the massive gears turning beneath the surface of all these crazy headlines.
That's a vital distinction, I think. We're really just analyzing the mechanics of the stress test here, not advocating for a specific outcome.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can understand the geopolitical fallout, we have to understand the boiling point. Like, why the province of Alberta?
Right.
And why is this happening right now in the spring of 2026? Set the timeline for us.
Well, the immediate catalyst, the spark that really set this off, was the April 2025 federal election.
Oh, when Prime Minister Mark Carney's Liberal Party was returned to power.
Exactly, and for a fourth consecutive term.
Mm-hmm.
So for a highly mobilized, very vocal segment of Alberta's population, that electoral outcome was basically interpreted as a permanent lockout from federal influence.
Like they were just stuck.
Right. And that was the spark that caused an organization called the Alberta Prosperity Project to aggressively accelerate a separatist petition.
And they pulled in some staggering numbers, didn't they? I mean, under provincial law, to force an actual independence question onto the upcoming October 2026 provincial ballot, they needed 177,732 signatures.
Yes.
What did they actually deliver?
On May 4th, 2026, the movement submitted 301,620 signatures.
Wow, over 300,000.
Yeah, they completely shattered the legal threshold.
Okay, so to understand why over 300,000 people in a wealthy G7 nation actively want to break away, we kind of have to look at the money, don't we? It seems like this all circles back to this deep sense of economic alienation.
It really does. And it stems from how Canada's federal system manages wealth, basically. I mean, Alberta is a massive economic engine.
Right.
Its per capita GDP is roughly 41% higher than the Canadian national average.
That's huge.
It is. But Canada relies on a federal equalization program designed to ensure that all provinces can offer, comparable public services.
Right. Spread the wealth around.
Exactly. But because Alberta's fiscal capacity is so high, the province contributes roughly 4.2 billion Canadian dollars annually to this federal pool, but they receive zero direct equalization benefits in return.
It's like being the highest earning roommate who pays all the rent and the utilities, but somehow you get stuck with the smallest bedroom.
That's a pretty good way to put it.
And now the landlord is actively trying to change the locks on you, Because it's not just the everyday equalization payments that are frustrating them. They feel like the very industry generating all that wealth is being actively dismantled.
Yeah, that is the core of the resentment right there. The report details a profound economic shock to Alberta's hydrocarbon sector. Between 2014 and 2023, investment in Alberta's oil and gas plummeted by 56%.
56%?
Yeah. We're talking about a drop from 84 billion Canadian dollars down to just 37 billion.
That is a massive hit. So who are they blaming for that?
Well, the province points to two main culprits. First, aggressive federal emissions regulations. And second, the rapid rise of ESG, environmental, social, and governance-oriented capital markets.
So it's basically a double hit.
Right.
You have the federal government creating stricter carbon pricing and pipeline hurdles, and simultaneously, global financial institutions are pulling their investment capital out of fossil fuels to meet their own climate targets.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, what we're observing is a textbook case of what political economists call productive periphery resentment.
Productive periphery resentment.
Right. This isn't just local complaining, it's a structural condition.
Yeah.
You have a highly productive, resource-rich region on the geographic periphery that feels entirely alienated from the governing framework in the political center.
Because they feel they're subsidizing the nation's social programs while the central government's policies actively punish their core industry.
Exactly.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Because of that incredible economic weight, international analysts quoted in the report have started using a very heavy, very provocative label for Alberta.
They have, yeah.
They're calling it Canada's Taiwan.
Now, hold on. I have to push back on this a bit because I'm trying to square this comparison in my head, and I'm struggling.
It's a bold claim, for sure.
Yeah.
Isn't calling Alberta Canada's Taiwan just pure sensationalism? I mean, Taiwan is an island facing an active existential military threat from a global superpower. Alberta is a landlocked province arguing with its federal government over carbon taxes.
Right.
There's no military deterrent required across the Saskatchewan border, you know.
Your skepticism is entirely justified, and the author of the report explicitly acknowledges that the analogy is imperfect.
Yeah.
As you pointed out, Canada is a stable constitutional democracy.
Yeah.
This is a dispute of negotiated federalism, not a standoff requiring aircraft carriers.
Yeah.
However, the report argues the Taiwan analogy is analytically useful strictly from a geostrategic vulnerability standpoint.
Meaning that both regions represent an indispensable choke point for the global supply chain.
Exactly that. I mean, think about Taiwan's advanced semiconductor manufacturing. If those factories go offline, the global tech economy essentially grinds to a halt.
Right. We saw shades of that during the pandemic.
Exactly. Well, Alberta functions similarly for the global energy and resource sector. It holds the fourth largest proven oil reserves on the planet. But, and this is crucial, in 2026, it's not just about the oil sands anymore.
It's about the materials required for the energy transition itself.
Yes.
The critical minerals.
Exactly. The report highlights the G7 summit from June 2025, which, ironically enough, was actually hosted in Kananaskis, Alberta.
Oh, interesting.
And at that summit, the G7 leaders launched the Critical Minerals Action Plan, or CMA.
Which was a massive geopolitical pivot, right? The G7 mobilized, what, 18.5 billion Canadian dollars across allied nations?
Yeah, 18.5 billion. And it had one specific goal, to counter China's overwhelming dominance in the rare earth elements supply chain.
Because we need these materials for electric vehicle batteries, advanced robotics, next-generation military hardware, everything.
Precisely. And Alberta is sitting on vast, untapped deposits of lithium, cobalt, and rare earths.
So, by hosting that specific summit in Kananaskis, the G7 effectively put a giant glowing pin on the map. They broadcast to the world that Alberta is central to Western economic security over the next 50 years.
And that is the double-edged sword of geostrategic importance. The moment a region is recognized as a global supply chain choke point, its internal politics stop being a purely domestic issue.
Right.
A separatist movement in a place like that becomes an absolute magnet for foreign actors who want to destabilize the West.
Which brings us to the shadow campaign. How has a domestic petition over carbon taxes and equalization actually become a target for global intelligence operations?
It starts with an underlying vulnerability, which malicious actors then exploit and amplify.
Okay, how so?
Well, a May 2026 report by DisinfoWatch revealed 4 distinct streams of external meddling aimed at fracturing this region. It began with external validation.
Meaning other countries cheering them on.
Kind of. The report notes several meetings between Alberta separatist leaders and United States political actors, specifically state and treasury officials.
Wow, really?
Yeah. You had U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and former Trump advisor Steve Bannon publicly validating the concept of Alberta breaking away and becoming the 51st U.S. state.
See, even if that's just political rhetoric from Washington, it gives the movement massive oxygen. It makes a fringe domestic idea feel globally legitimate to the people signing that petition.
Exactly. And once that psychological door was opened, the digital interference really began. And the scale of the vulnerability was unprecedented. DisinfoWatch tracked a massive voter data breach where the personal records of 2.9 million Albertans were allegedly shared with a separatist-adjacent organization called the Centurion Project.
Wait, 2.9 million. So they had the raw data of almost the entire voting age population of the province.
Pretty much.
But data is just ammunition, right? You need a weapon to fire it. How are they actually targeting these individual Albertans so effectively?
That is where the third stream comes in AI-optimized micro-targeting.
Oh.
We aren't talking about generic political billboards here.
Right.
Artificial intelligence algorithms process those 2.9 million profiles to precisely identify the specific economic anxieties of individual voters.
Oh, wow. So if you were an oil field worker worried about your pension.
The AI-generated custom-tailored content designed to convince you, specifically, that separation was your only financial lifeline.
That is terrifying.
It is. And the fourth stream provided the sheer volume to drown out everything else. The Russian state-aligned disinformation.
Right. The report tracked a separatist website back to a network called Storm 1516, I think, which is linked to the Russian Internet Research Agency.
Exactly. And just to highlight how surgical this targeting was, a Kremlin-aligned news network called Pravda News published 67 articles amplifying Alberta separatism.
67.
Yeah. Compared to just 14 articles about Ontario, which is Canada's largest province, they were surgically pouring gasoline on the fire.
What really stuck with me from the report, though, is how insidious this breach was. It noted that 83% of the Russian disinformation circulating on this topic wasn't actually being distributed by Russian bots.
No, it wasn't.
It was being shared, liked, and amplified by ordinary, real Canadian users. If that's the case, how does a democracy even fight back? It feels like the call is coming from inside the house.
What's fascinating here is we're entering an era where democratic nations have to seriously define cognitive sovereignty.
Cognitive sovereignty, what does that mean exactly?
Well, we all understand territorial sovereignty, right? Protecting physical borders with military.
Right.
But cognitive sovereignty is the capacity of a democratic society to make independent, consequential political decisions free from systematic algorithmic manipulation by foreign adversaries.
Okay, I see.
When a foreign entity can use AI to basically rewire the political reality of millions of voters, your cognitive sovereignty has been breached.
Man, it just feels incredibly daunting. You have a movement armed with over 300,000 signatures, fueled by genuine economic resentment, validated by U.S. politicians, mapped by a massive data breach, and artificially amplified by Russian intelligence.
It's a lot.
It sounds like an unstoppable force. But then just days ago, it slammed into an immovable object.
The legal framework of the land itself.
Exactly. Despite all the hyper-modern digital warfare and undeniable political momentum, the separatist movement was stopped completely cold in a courtroom. Walk us through what happened on May 13th.
This is where the deep foundational history of Canada becomes the most relevant geopolitical fact of 2026. The legal foundation of the land we call Alberta isn't actually provincial.
Right.
It's built upon Treaties 6, 7, and 8. Which were signed between various First Nations and the British Crown between 1876 and 1899.
Which is before the province of Alberta even existed, right? Because Alberta wasn't formally created as a province until 1905.
Exactly. That timeline is legally critical. These treaties are protected under Section 35 of Canada's Constitution Act of 1982, and crucially, they are Crown obligations.
Okay, explain that for someone who might not be familiar with the Canadian legal system.
Sure. So, to put that in perspective, for anyone outside the Commonwealth, these aren't just standard contracts with a local municipal government. They are nation-to-nation agreements backed by the sovereign authority of the state.
So that supersedes any legislation a single province tries to pass today.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? It sounds like the separatists are trying to sell a house that they only rent. I mean, the original foundational deed actually belongs to the First Nations and the Crown, and the provincial government simply doesn't have the authority to tear up that deed and walk away with the land.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize the legal reality. Indigenous groups, specifically the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation, brought these legal challenges forward.
Wow.
And on May 13, 2026, Justice Shayna Leonard ruled in their favor, effectively striking down the independence petition. The legal logic was ironclad. A province cannot unilaterally dissolve a Crown Indigenous treaty obligation. It is a legal impossibility under the Canadian Constitution.
So these Indigenous groups didn't just sit back as passive bystanders watching a political fight. They stepped up as active, independent constitutional actors?
This raises an important question, I think, about the adaptive capacity of complex legal systems.
How so?
Think about this incredible historical inversion. You have Indigenous communities that have been historically marginalized, often brutally, by the mechanisms of the state. And right now, in 2026, They have emerged as the ultimate constitutional load-bearers of the country.
It's just astonishing.
They are the ones legally defending Canadian territorial integrity against a modern separatist threat.
A 19th century treaty designed to consolidate the state's power has become the only instrument strong enough to prevent that same state from fracturing in the 21st century.
Exactly.
But even with the legal route blocked by the courts, you still have the underlying anger. You still have the economic grievance, the 300,000 signatures, and the foreign interference. How does the government defuse a bomb that big?
Well, the crisis required a massive pragmatic off-ramp, because as the legal road closed, the sheer economic reality of what separation would actually entail started to really dawn on Alberta's business community.
They started doing the math.
Yeah. The internal economic contradictions of the movement became impossible to ignore.
The report cites a prominent economist, Trevor Tombe, who ran the numbers on what independence would look like. He estimated that separation would act like a severe Brexit-style shock to Alberta.
Very much so.
He said it would cost the province roughly 20 billion Canadian dollars in GDP and put 120,000 jobs at immediate risk.
The mechanics of that kind of economic hit are brutal. I mean, you suddenly have hard international borders on all sides of a landlocked region. You have to negotiate entirely new trade deals, figure out a new currency, and deal with massive capital flight due to the uncertainty.
Right. It's no wonder a survey found that 53% of the Calgary Chamber of Commerce members cited separation as their single biggest business concern.
They realized that tearing down the house would crush the economy they were trying to protect.
And so, with independence legally blocked and the business community sounding the alarm, we get to the compromise. Enter the May 15, 2026 Implementation Agreement, signed by Prime Minister Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. Let's look at the terms of this deal, because the scale is absolutely breathtaking.
It really is. So the federal government agreed to fast-track a Pacific Tidewater pipeline capable of moving 1 million barrels of oil per day by 2027.
1 million barrels a day. That is a massive infrastructural concession. I mean, that opens up lucrative Asian markets and reduces Alberta's reliance on U.S. buyers.
Exactly. And in exchange, Alberta formally stays in the Federation and agrees to a federal carbon price on its heavy industry.
But, and this is a massive caveat, right? That carbon price is capped at 95 Canadian dollars per ton, slowly rising to $130 by the year 2040.
Which completely ignores the official federal mandate, which demands a carbon price of $170 per ton by 2030.
Wait, let me get this straight. The federal target is $170, but they're capping Alberta's industry at $95.
That's right.
That gap creates an enormous financial loophole. The report estimates that concessions saves Alberta's industry roughly 250 billion Canadian dollars over 2 decades.
It's a staggering amount of money.
I have to ask, isn't this just Ottawa opening a massive checkbook to make a political headache go away? I mean, is this really a grand strategy of structured accommodation or just an incredibly expensive, hypocritical Band-Aid?
Well, it definitely looks like a hypocritical Band-Aid if you view federalism as a rigid, uniform structure where every single region must follow the exact same rules at all times.
Which a lot of people do.
They do.
Yeah.
But political scientists look at this compromise and see a concept called differentiated integration, or asymmetric federalism.
Meaning you design different sets of rules for different regions based on their unique structural realities and vulnerabilities.
Yes. The report argues that accommodating a resource-rich region with an exemption like this isn't a failure of policy. It's a necessary survival mechanism.
Oh, I see.
If advanced democracies are going to survive the global energy transition, moving their economies from fossil fuels to renewables, they cannot simply punish the regions that produce the old energy. The economic pain in those productive peripheries creates too much political backlash, which then threatens the stability of the entire democratic structure.
Because you can't just tell the engine room of your economy to shut down without offering them a new blueprint, and more importantly, some serious capital to build it.
Exactly.
If you push them too hard, the resentment becomes a national security threat.
Right. Asymmetric federalism is how you allow the bridge to sway so it doesn't snap into the tension.
Which brings us right back to you listening to this deep dive. Why is a pipeline deal in Calgary or a court ruling regarding an 1876 treaty matter to you wherever you are in the world?
It matters because what is happening in Alberta is a blueprint. It's a stress test for the modern world.
Because the primary takeaway from Furi Novan's report is that advanced Western democracies are not automatically resilient. We take for granted that our institutions will hold simply because they always have.
But this situation proves that surviving an era of AI manipulation, information warfare, and massive, painful economic transitions requires two distinct things.
Right, the report outlines this clearly. First, you need a willingness to offer deep, material, pragmatic accommodations to the people actually feeling the pain of change. You have to bend the rules to keep everyone in the building.
And second, you need deep, unbreakable legal anchors holding the foundation together.
Exactly.
And if I can leave everyone with one final thought to mull over, think about the deep irony of what actually saved the Canadian Federation in this scenario.
Yeah.
We're living in an era dominated by artificial intelligence, micro-targeting, state-sponsored digital disinformation, and hyper-modern economic warfare. And yet, what if the ultimate safeguard for a modern Western democracy turns out to be its oldest, most historically fraught 19th century agreements?
Wow. That is heavy.
What if the ghosts of the past are the only things heavy enough to anchor our future?
That is a deeply unsettling but strangely comforting thought. You think you're standing on modern concrete, but it's the ancient bedrock underneath that actually keeps the ground from splitting open when the pressure builds. Keep questioning the foundations of the world around you, because as we've seen today, the surface rarely tells the whole story. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.